So it's my great pleasure to welcome two researchers from IREX, which is a nonprofit research firm, Maxie Gluckman and Brittany Aubin. Have I pronounced that correctly?
That's probably the correct way to say it. Aubin is how I typically say it, though,
Okay, I'm
but
thinking in
it's
French
French.
like
Yes.
Aubin, but I got to anglicize it. But I want to welcome you both. Thank you so much for being here today, being available, and enthusiastic about sharing your knowledge. I'm going to, without further ado, hand the mic over to Maxie, and she can introduce her presentation with Brittany and the subject and all that good stuff. So, welcome, Maxie. Over to you.
Thank you, Andrew, for this opportunity. And Brittany, if you wouldn't mind going back to the first slide, sharing the screen. Um, we're really excited to talk to you today about our experiences related to digital upskilling and some of the curriculum work that we've been building. It's important for us to call out kind of the diverse team that has been involved in this work. Brittany, if you can go to our next slide. Well, Brittany and myself are here representing from IREX, and specifically I work within this Center for Applied Learning and Impact, Cali, which is our research and innovation, and Brittany from the education practice. We do have a really broad team that was integral in creating this work, both from IREX and from our expert youth researchers, one of which we do have on this call. Thanks for joining, Emmanuel. So Brittany, if you'd like to introduce yourself, and I do apologize for any background noise you hear as I'm in the airport.
Thanks, Maxie. Hi, everyone. My name is Brittany. As Maxie said, I am a technical advisor here at IREX, focusing on EdTech. And really, my passion in my career has always been about how do we use technology within learning environments to better enable behavior change and kind of like lifelong opportunity. And so this is a project that dovetails very nicely to that. Been at IREX for about a year and a half, and I'm based in the beautiful Nyack, New York. Um, and so I'm going to start us off with some guiding questions for today's conversation. And this is a small group, and I think everyone here has probably a lot of really great things to say about some of the topics that we're talking about. And so encourage people to come off mic and talk. We have kind of these guiding questions for the audience here in these little orange bubbles. So feel free to answer them directly or just respond in the chat. But some things that Maxie and I really wanted to talk about with this particular group today are these three questions. So we know that in order to have effective and relevant programming with young people, it really needs to be grounded in both their needs and their context. But it's difficult for people who are coming, especially when we're thinking about within the international sector, people who are coming from very different backgrounds and different spaces, and without the ability to travel and kind of be immersed in those environments to really understand that need and context. And so, how can we determine those in a way that is participatory and also non-extractive, right? So not just us coming in and kind of like sucking up information and then leaving. And how can we really do that? And then once we have a better understanding of youth needs, how can we develop solutions that are really authentic to lived experiences? And we know that there is real evidence that authenticity is so important for meaningful learning, for meaningful behavior change. And then a topic very close to my heart is how can we leverage this really, really powerful new technology or kind of more democratized technology that is generative AI to be more efficient in the work that we do, but also create more kind of equitable learning experiences that support youth programming. So those are some of the questions that we are going to just touch the surface of today. And if anyone wants to share about youth that you work with and the capacities that you work with youth, feel free to do that in the chat, or if people want to just come off mute now and talk about some things, we can kind of add that to the conversation as well.
I think it's important for us to kind of frame what we mean when we talk about youth. We do at IREX use the 15 to 35. I know I see in the chat here, like Kara, if that's pronounced correctly, works in teacher training. I'm curious to know what levels you're working with, and then, you know, public health and education. So there's quite a lot of multi-sectoral people on this call. When you think of youth, does that range map with where you work, or are there more specifics? So we have a context for the rest of this call.
Maxie, I hate to do this, but I'd like to interrupt quickly and just introduce Mike Nuckola, who's joined us. Mike is the founder of the GPN, and I think he might want to just say a few quick words of welcome. Mike?
Thanks, Andrew. Sorry, everybody, for being late. For some reason, I couldn't get in through the link, so I had Jackie help me figure out an alternative route. So great to have you here, Maxie and Brittany. I've looked into your work quite a bit since Andrew introduced me to it, and it's just a pleasure to have you join our group today. It's the beginning of kind of a fall break here at Penn, and with the Jewish holidays, I don't know what our attendance will look like today, but nonetheless, it's being recorded. We'll get the word out, and it's just a pleasure to have you join us.
Thanks so much, Mike. I actually have a toddler home for the Jewish holidays, so hopefully we will not be interrupted by any loud wheels on a bus playing, but I can make no guarantees for that.
Well, we'll be ready.
Great, thank you, Mike. All right, so we were just about to dig in. We didn't hear any feedback on kind of who you work with in regards to youth, so I'm going to practice my teacher pause for maybe another 20 seconds and see if there's any input. Okay, we got something from Jackie in the chat. Welcome to join us. Leah, thank you. And I didn't share this at the beginning. I do come from an education background. I was an elementary school teacher and worked in teacher training for a long time before moving into international development and research.
Yeah, so feel free to add more context as we go on, and we can, especially as we look more at the tools and some of the work that we did, compare and contrast with what IREX has been working on. Okay, so going to this first question about how do we think about defining youth needs? So some of the lessons that we learned from this process of digital youth digital upskilling was we first kind of honed in on this really pressing development concern, which is the digital skills gap. I think we've all kind of heard that talked about in the news to some various extent, and also in the research. And so we wanted to learn to kind of put more kind of knowledge around what felt like something that was really pressing for the populations that we work with. So we did a comprehensive literature review that was run through the IREX office. One of our colleagues, Isabella, really dove into that, Maxie and myself supporting. And then based on that literature review, which uncovered a lot of things that validated and also added more kind of information to our initial kind of thoughts around the digital skills gap, we contextualized that further within the kind of environment of Kenya through youth-led research. And just realized I forgot to plug my computer in, so hang on so I don't shut down. All right. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to dive through some numbers on the digital skills gap and the implications that has. So in our literature review, we found that there are 1.1 billion jobs worldwide that are at risk because of the current digital skill. They are at risk of being fundamentally altered within the next decade. So in 10 years from now, we'll see 1.1 billion jobs that currently exist that look fundamentally different than how they look right now. We also found, this is from insight from the World Economic Forum, that 44% of our current skills are going to become obsolete in the next 5 years due to the rapid integration of technology into business. I would love to have some input as to which 44% of skills I would like to not use anymore, but unfortunately, we don't have that much control over that piece. But I have a good short list I could offer. And then we also know that 85.2 million individuals, both in the developing world, but also in the developed world, are going to be impacted by the digital skills gap within the next decade. And then lastly, because everyone responds well to numbers and money, there is research that says that there is $8.45 trillion worth of potential unrealized revenue from the current kind of skills chasm between what workers currently know and what they need to know to be successful in our new technological age. So these, I think, are really serious numbers, and I think they ground a lot of things that we already kind of intuitively feel about the way the world of work is changing. And then we also looked at how has the learning community and the employment community responded to the skills gap. And what we found is that currently, at the global level, 0.5% of GDP is allocated to lifelong learning, which is a really, really small amount, especially if we were to kind of compare this. And there's lots of graphics that do this to some of the other kind of spending levels of GDP for other things. And we know, again, thinking of numbers, that $6.5 trillion could be contributed to the GDP if we were to enhance global skilling and upskilling. So not only thinking about the education system that's getting people up into their entry-level careers, but also upskilling existing workers who are in their careers, and also reskilling workers whose jobs are going to be affected by the changing nature of technology within the workplace. And then I think probably relevant, particularly for this audience, is that we also know that this is really disproportionately impacting women. And there's lots of contextual reasons for that we're not going to get into, that we do have some information about in the actual lit review. But for one example here, there was a UNICEF study that showed that for every 100 men who had a certain level of digital skills, 65 women had the same level of digital skills. So 45 women did not have the same level of digital fluency as the men in that study. So all of these things, again, really confirm for us sitting in, our offices in IREX, this is a really big problem, and that it is something that felt like it was worthwhile for us to address, but we needed to, it's a big issue. We need to narrow it down into a smaller space. And so we wanted to look at how these kind of big global trends in digital skills and upskilling were impacting young people in Kenya. And so that's where our research process came in. And I'm going to hand it over to Maxie to talk about how we took this lit review and then further honed in on the Kenya context.
Great, thank you, Brittany. So we'll talk a little bit about this research process, but before I do, I just kind of want to tag on some of the things in the chat here. Some of the things that stood out to me, for example, Mike, when you were mentioning the exploring interests of undergraduate students, as we're talking about the process of how do you do that with youth? How do you do that with the populations that you're looking to develop programming to serve? That's what we'll share a little bit about in this research process. And then the fact that we use the term youth, but a lot of these processes just are best practices in terms of working with communities and working in collaboration. So while we use that term, it can go broader to other populations that you might serve and get the opportunity to work with, Jessica. So thank you for that comment. So some of the nitty gritty. If you're interested in more of these details, we can definitely share. But since we aren't associated with a particular university, we went for an international IRB using the HML IRB system, and really just ensuring that we were attentive to all of those aspects of research ethics when going into collaborate on this research with local Kenyan researchers. And then actually a huge shout out to Emmanuel, who helped us with the approvals for the Nakasti local Kenyan research license. When we were working on developing the questions and interval protocol, this was done through collaborative meetings with our expert researchers, and we were looking specifically at unpacking how do the youth that we interview engage online, plan to learn, how do they take time to learn new skills, where do they go, and what's their process, and really trying to make sure we didn't come in with any perceived biases or assumptions about how learning happens online. And so in terms of screening and recruiting, there was some priorities to make sure there was inclusion around gender and other social identities and cultural identities that were relevant in the Kenyan space, language spoken, other rural urban dynamics. And so 44 interviews were conducted with youth within this range. And then in data analysis, which Brittany will talk a little bit more about how we employed generative AI and also really took a critical eye towards doing so, but also validating. We did some emerging themes with ChatGPT and an internal designed GPT, and we'll unpack that a little bit. And then we validated those with the youth research team. On the next slide, I just want to pull out a little bit more information about youth leadership and research design. And if we have some time at the end, maybe Emmanuel can share some of his reflections. But in this co-design process, it's not that as a team we came in with a particular question or a way in which we were going to approach it. We really did that collectively to make sure that it was aligned to something that would be culturally relevant. And then the youth researchers who had worked with us on a prior research initiative were responsible for organizing, recruiting, and conducting the interviews, compiling the data, and we provided support as needed. And then in the data analysis, I wasn't so good at systematically with this announcement online here. We did a co-analysis, as I mentioned. So really critical to think about how youth are invited and intentionally create spaces for leadership, especially given many competing priorities. So a few points to pull out is they were compensated for their time, but also we tried to determine how can we take some of the load off as a team, but also build in these check-in points in really critical junctures of the research process. Next slide. And I wanted to bring these tools to your attention, and we can share the links directly in the chat if you can't get the QR codes. This will be recorded. IREX has developed quite a few resources around youth-led research, but two standouts that we want to draw to your attention is there's a research to change toolkit, which is specifically around implementation research. So research that happens with the intention of using it to change actual programming in the moment. And it's developed as a workbook and has been used primarily in a program that we have is a USAID called Youth Excel, which has been implemented in over 20 countries. And it helps with that process of how do you generate research questions? How do you identify stakeholders from start to finish? And then critical to a lot of the research that we've conducted at IREX, and a huge area of expertise is also around gender equity and inclusion. And so the intersectional rapid gender and protection analysis workbook and toolkit is also a really strong resource that as you're going into, I think it was Uzbekistan and China, and you're thinking about how you're going to do this, these are open source resources that you can pull and draw upon. Next slide.
All right. I'll give you a break, Maxie, for your airport announcements. So once we had conducted all this research, so we had 44 really, really rich interviews of an hour long that were all kind of really looking into these like questions around how do young people upskill, learn digital skills, prepare for the world of work, in particularly in a way that felt really self-directed because of the fact that the education system wasn't, meeting the needs, and employers that young people might have were not also meeting the needs. Not every one is blessed to have an organization that has a wonderful L&D department, for example. Those things, are not necessarily, a given. So how could we take all this research and build a solution that was really going to be authentic to young people's lived experiences? Some of the lessons that we learned for that were to partner with young people throughout the process, and then develop these curricular experiences that really centered the youth voice, and included both examples and also practice opportunities that reflected their reality. And I'm going to talk about exactly how we were able to do that. Again, some audience questions. We love to hear more about some of the pressing issues that are affecting young people that you work with, or people that you work with, and then strategies that you might use to determine their needs. If it's similar to what IREX has done in terms of research, or maybe it looks different. And anyone is welcome to come off mute and share, or just add to the chat.
Brittany, I can share a couple of things. A common theme that we see from middle school through the undergraduate years is simply uncertainty as to where one can go for work. How interesting is that type of work? Am I a good fit for it? What kinds of skills do I need? So we hear that articulated by middle schoolers, and I even hear it articulated by our graduate students at times.
Yeah, I feel like there's also a bunch of research that's come out around like the power of career information and guidance materials, and then how those can have such a big impact on how people feel able to enter into the world of work. I don't think that came up as much in some of the research that we had about the unknowing, but there was, I think, a sense of feeling like there were limited opportunities within the Kenyan environment, and a desire to kind of work more internationally, as typically as freelance, as part of that.
Yeah, I'm sure this varies tremendously by context.
But now one of the things I think is relevant for that example, Mike, and also for the example that we worked on in Kenya, is that so often, the best way to kind of show people the path forward is through stories. And so, I consider myself a little bit of a learning scientist, very, very small interest in that field, and it's something that you can kind of constantly be building your skill sets in. But one of the things that I truly believe is that the shortest distance between two people is a story. It is one of the most effective tools that we have for behavior change, for learning. And there's a lot of kind of like real kind of neuroscience reasons for that. We know that real world examples can boost motivation. People are more likely to say, to persist through a learning experience if they feel a connection to it, if they can see its relevancy to their lives. It also improves our ability to actually retain the information, to move it from short-term to long-term memory if we kind of encapsulate learning or learning within the context of a scenario. We also know, and this is coming again from the world of behavior change, that putting near peers, or showing near peers, so someone who is similar to you in a realistic or authentic scenario, can build your own sense of self-efficacy, and again also boost that sense of relevance. Like, why am I learning this thing, right? It's because it has real power over the brain when we see someone who is similar to us doing something, And then there's no neuroscience here, but I personally believe that stories are magic. I think that they have a unique ability within the human species to propel us, motivate us, do the things that learning is meant to do. And so we knew kind of going into this that we wanted to figure out some way to ground our curriculum in authentic storytelling. Now, the problem was, we were a team of 4 people in Washington, D.C., with limited time on this project and a very kind of tight implementation deadline. And then we also had, 44-hour-long interviews to parse through. And so how can we really turn those interviews into stories in a way that both felt realistic and effective, but also efficient with our time as well? And so the way that we did that is that we leveraged ChatGPT. And so the first thing that we did is we took all of this massive amount of interview data that we had, and we de-identified it. Oh, first we had our colleague who's not here today, Isabella. She went through and kind of looked at the data quality, kind of sorted everything into this massive Excel spreadsheet. And then we de-identified and anonymized all the data so that there was no, personal information that would have gotten into this spreadsheet. And so that was really a big manual task that Isabella took on, and major kudos to her for doing it. And then we utilized ChatGPT to do some initial theming for us. So going through and kind of identifying kind of big themes that they saw. Isabella chopped up this spreadsheet into smaller, we had it divided into 4 kind of domains. And so she was able to kind of talk through, the various kind of smaller bits of the file and get some initial theming. We also then did some kind of chunks of that theming work manually to cross-reference like what it was that we were getting from ChatGPT versus what it was that we were finding on our own. I think we found in particular that, and Maxie can back me up because she did a lot of this by hand, our own ability to find quotes, powerful quotes, was much better than ChatGPT. And so that was, I think, an area where the robots are not beating us yet. But we did find that there was generally consensus between what we were looking at and what our tools were finding. And then we said, okay, well then the analysis is good, but there's still this storytelling piece, right? And I think when we write stories, we cannot separate ourselves from the research, right? And so the stories that if we were to tell them, or we were to come up with the storyline, we would impose our own bias, our own context, our own reality, right? And so like, how can we use ChatGPT to actually write stories for us? And so to do that, we had to give it all of the interview data, the de-identified interview data, but we had a very hard time working with the Excel file. And so we had to convert that to a Word file, which I'll show you. And we had ChatGPT do that for us as well, which was a game changer. And that allowed us to really create this tool that produced really workable curriculum. I mean, it needed a lot of help from us, but it did so in a way that we just wouldn't have been able to get to, independently. So I'm going to do a little bit of a demo of how we called it our robot friend, how we create our robot friend to do story-based learning with us. And then I just want to give a big caveat that I think sometimes people felt like, oh, it's like a magic wand. Like you do the research, you de-identify it, you feed it ChatGPT, out comes a curriculum. It definitely was not that. But I always say that these things are not solutions, they are tools. So it was a very valuable tool in developing the solution that we eventually came up with. So I'm going to exit out of this PowerPoint and quickly show the ChatGPT. Are you all still seeing my screen? Okay, great.
It's just a little small, Brittany. It's just a little small, if anything.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'll zoom in. I guess before I start, has anyone built custom GPTs before within ChatGPT? I see some shaking heads.
I have not, Brittany.
Okay, so this will be a fun learning experience. I had never built one before this either, and now I do it a lot. So this was our original Excel sheet. So no demographics, no information, no numbers. We removed all kind of the transcript numbers as well. But it's really, really massive, and it was hard for the ChatGPT to parse it. And so I need it to be in a Word file so that the tool could read it more as if it was text and not data, which it was reading it when it was in Excel. So I asked ChatGPT to take this and turn it into a Word document where every column, which each column is one interview, every column with its own kind of had its own heading, right? And so it produced this document, which you can see is about 2,500 pages, so not light reading. Granted, there's a lot of white space that it doesn't matter for the tool, but still quite a lot of information. And if you were to open the navigation pane, you can see these are all of our interviews kind of under each column. And then from there, I went to the ChatGPT GPTs page. So this is a page within ChatGPT, and I'll put it's available for everyone. At the one point, it was only available to paid subscribers, but that's not the case anymore. Anyone can access this page. And these are basically tools that allow you to slightly customize ChatGPT's outputs for specific tasks. And so you can utilize, some of the ones that are already here. So you can see that there's trending ones. There are ones that are produced by ChatGPT. There's one that helps you take care of your plants, which I definitely need sometimes. Even coloring book pages, I have definitely done this with ChatGPT. And there's also many of them that are specific to research and also education, which are useful. And you can just open any of these up and have a conversation with them. For the purposes of today, I kind of cooking show style prepared some tabs for us. So if you wanted to create a custom GPT, you would go up here to create. And when you click create, it's going to take you to a page that looks like this. So this is your new GPT. We can name it test GPT, and that will show up there. And then there's two ways of working with this. One way you can do it is you can put your custom prompt right within this, paste it right inside this instruction box, and tell it exactly what it is that you want it to do, and then update all the knowledge here. Alternatively, and this is the way that I started off doing them, is that you can have an actual conversation. So you can actually talk to this, and as you're having this conversation, it will build the configure page for you in the background. And then you could hop back into the configure page and make any tweaks. You can always change this at any point. It's very malleable. Now, there are some important features that I think it's good to highlight. So you're able to upload files. So I'll show you in our GPT what this looks like. But once you upload files, it will give you this option here called additional settings. I personally do believe this is meant to be very, very cryptic, that it is so tiny and you really have to scroll down to find it. But if you go to click additional settings, there is a little box that says use conversation data in your GPT to improve our models. And so if you're using data that is sensitive, I mean, obviously there is no, OpenAI is moving away from being a nonprofit. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I do think it is safer to just uncheck that box, and your data is not being fed in to improve any of the training data. You can also change the capabilities. So you can turn off web browsing. If you turn off web browsing, any question that you ask will only be informed by your training data and the training data that the AI model was trained on. So it still can have bias, right? Because we know that even without being connected to the internet, these tools still have bias in them. But if you were to turn off that, you're basically, you're putting more of the pressure on the system to use your data versus, the internet. That's a decision. You can kind of toggle it on and off and see what gets better answers. You can decide whether or not you want it to be able to create images. We had ours, it created images and we used it in a curriculum. And then code interpreter, which allows it to kind of do some data analysis for you. So you can turn that on and off as well. And so when you kind of fill this all out, depending on what it is that you want your topic to cover, you'll get an actual tool that you can use to help you to build curriculum. And so here's our Digitalese Data Advisor bot. And you can see that I have the Word document here that's over here. I've uploaded that. I've kept all of these things on. And then if we were to go to the prompts quickly, these are the instructions. I can try to, I don't know if I can make this any bigger. Hopefully people can see it okay. But we give it its role, right? So we say very clearly, this is the role that you're meant to do. You're meant to interpret this qualitative data for us. We give it information about how to understand the Word file. So each heading in a Word file is one interview. Descriptions about how to create, we want realistic scenario-based learning and multiple choice questions that are relevant and impactful. We provide a little bit of data about what its personality is, which we know is very helpful for GPTs to produce better outputs. And then the next two paragraphs are things that I like to call magic words. So they've done some testing on GPT models and have discovered that there are certain things that you can prompt GPT and it will improve its performance. So one of the things that is helpful is to say that this is very important work. We don't know why that is. They also know that it is better if you tell the tool to ask questions if it does not know the answer, and as opposed to just creating an answer without knowing one. We also know that it works better if you tell it you'll pay it money. So I say that I will tip it $20 a month, which is not lying, because I do have a paid subscription to OpenAI, so technically true. And then they also have shown, and I think this is like where it can really kind of break your brain when you think about it. These tools perform better if you tell them that they've done it before, and if they're not sure, to stop, take a deep breath, and think it through step by step. So, adding these magic words, in theory, can help your eventual tool to perform better. And there's lots of information about these things on the internet and guides for how to create them. And then you can share. So if you're a team, you can make it so that anyone with the link has access to this. So that's what we did. You can also make it so that it appears in a GPT store, so that it would be publicly available in the same way all the other ones that I just showed you were. I don't see a real use case for that, but we can, there might be some, or you can just have it that's just for you. I'm not going to update because I haven't made any changes here, but I'm just going to go back. And I am going to, I prepared a prompt just so we can see what this looks like. So you don't have to slowly watch me typing and do lots of typos. This is a simple little prompt. I gave it the name Wenjiku, which is a name that we used for our story, about someone who just finished a 3-month self-directed course on Excel and is now searching for jobs to apply for that use her new skills. And the GPT is thinking. And you can see it's spitting out a little story about Wanjiku. We don't need to read all of this, but if you wanted to kind of say, okay, this sounds good, this is a good story for my story-based curriculum. Maybe we found that ChatGPT is very verbose, even if you tell it not to be verbose. So we always had to kind of edit it back a little bit. But if you wanted to find out what the trends from the interviews are that supported that, you would just ask that question, and it will come up with some of the things that kind of fueled how it made that story. And you can see here it's pulling out that there were some trends around, a lot of young people were using YouTube for learning. Talked about there was a lot of self-doubt among the participants as they were engaging in digital upskilling. Looking for roles outside of Kenya. So it's kind of talking through like what it is that, how it made that story. So that is a lightning fast demo of our ChatGPT tool. I'm going to pass it back to Maxie to talk about how this manifested as curriculum, but happy to like answer any questions. And I didn't see what came through in the chat, so I'm not sure if there's any questions there.
I think it's still a lot for people to process, including me. How well it really can create these conversations and scenarios. Thank you, Brittany, for that tutorial. And of course, this is recorded. So if it was super fast and you want to go back and review it, that's why that's a good opportunity that we have here. And yes, so Mike, that's a really good question. We're going to show you one of the scenarios that we wrote. And I think in response to, do they correspond with what we would have written as researchers? We had the stories validated as researchers, and so we agreed with everything that it said, but we did do quite a lot of paring down to be able to make it short, to the point, add some cultural context. We went through a couple of different iterations, but in terms of our intention wasn't to produce a research report on the main findings, it was to employ this research to help engage youth in reflections. And so on the next slide, you'll see one example from the actual Digital Ease curriculum. And for our story was around Wanjiku. And we also asked, and ChatGPT was able to create multiple choice questions, fill in the blank questions, reflection activities. And so then we worked to modify those. There were multiple different iterations. I also can see a few faces that are on camera, but I saw some surprised and kind of how quickly it was able to create some of these things. So I wanted to give some space if there were any other reactions, if you want to use come off mute or react using the reaction button just to the tool before I dive into this. And we'll have some broader time for Q&A at the end.
This is a special security at all times.
Any reflections or thoughts? Thanks, Brittany, for jumping in.
Yeah, I was intrigued, Brittany, to see your demo. I've seen one other academic who's also American-based. He has a YouTube series, and I apologize. I'll try to find his name and throw it in the chat before our session's over. But literally trying to sort of, crack the code as you have as to what the exact prompts are to sort of do that thematic analysis. Which is fascinating. I mean, I've only played with the functionality. I use my own resume as, sort of a pilot case of saying, like, rewrite my CV focused on policy, rewrite my CV focused on, human rights, just to see what it would come up with and to try to practice and learn the skills of the technology. But I like this leap that you're taking it to, not just to sort of do the students' heavy lifting, as researchers ourselves in higher education of doing the thematic analysis when we have such rich, deep transcripts to go through, which is how I found this other example. But to sort of leverage that into content creation of curriculum, I think that this is where we're starting to see the real efficiencies in the sector and what it can bring to the table in terms of producing things that are still data valid, but produced in a more efficient manner. So thank you for sort of showing how it goes to the next level.
Yeah, and I would say there is a relationship there, right? We talk about human computer relationship. And so like I think the first like module was really clunky and like trying to figure out like what prompts, like what follow-up questions, how do I get it to like give me what I wanted to do? And so I always like tell everyone it's like it literally is a tool that gets better with practice and it is not at a place where you could take the human out of the loop. And so I think we had to, as Maxie was saying, we had to be very much like going back in, tweaking, refining, and staying very, very closely involved. It wasn't like we could just press a button and be like, okay, cool, curriculum's done. But it was a very fun experience. And I think for me, as someone who's a real techno optimist, I have found this to be so interesting to just like play around and be like, what can I do differently with this thing that I wasn't able to do, without it.
Thanks, Brittany. And I was actually just in a training yesterday. We're upskilling ourselves on the use of AI in a generative AI in an ethical and productive manner for work. So by no means an expert, and I think Brittany was really helping me in that regards be a little more comfortable because it can be scary. So I'll just read you one little chunk out of this and you can kind of get a sense of this story aspect. Wanjiku, we really framed and also created this image using ChatGPT and then went back and forth with a couple of different iterations to create a character that those who are engaging with the curriculum could really get invested in and relate to. And we had our hashtags, Wanjiku and I, and little things during our pilots that we to connect with. And so Wanjiku's journey begins in a small shared apartment that doubles as her study. Surrounded by notes and an old laptop, she starts outlining her goals. Wanjiku knows that effective learning starts with clear objectives, so she sketches out her purpose: to gain practical digital skills that will elevate her career and satisfy her curiosity about the digital world. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the concept was we could go through and just tell someone in a training that SMART goals are important. But instead of doing that, we're crafting and sharing examples of SMART goals in a story-based format. And on the next slide, we'll kind of talk about how we've gone through and piloted this. All right, so we have a couple of aspects of uptake that have happened over the last few months. Had a really strong collaboration with Safe Online Women Kenya, and Emmanuel is on this call as part of that organization that really focuses on empowering and protecting women and girls online. And we did this pilot in Nairobi, specifically geared towards women who were really diverse in experience. And you think when we talk about entrepreneurs, lawyers, biologists, teachers, they might have more familiarity with technology, but they still really were surprised by some of these small bite-sized learning opportunities, like thinking about how to really turn off cookies and the effect of a digital shadow and how it follows you around, to being more in depth and immersed in the concept of technology facilitated gender-based violence and being able to prepare strategies and tools to mitigate that and to protect themselves and peers from that. This curriculum will be open source and online within the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that. And on this QR code, and I'll put the link in the chat, is where you'll be able to find it. We published our lit review and more of an informal on our website that you can draw from, and the kind of the call to why this was created. And then we've had it integrated into a couple of curriculum that are implemented across IREX. So She's Great STEM Academy is a youth-focused curriculum in many countries around the world. And we're currently working with a Tanzanian journalist organization, building skills for Tanzanian journalists around navigating online spaces, the ESE efficiently, safely, and effectively. As we know that this will change. The learning and what they need to learn online, what we all need to learn online is changing so rapidly. We weren't looking to create an AI training or any particular skill, but just really building those skills around lifelong learning. So I will put that in the chat for you if you're interested. So passing yeah, and this just to bring us to this final kind of reflection around generative AI. And we started this conversation is this question: can it be an efficient and equitable tool to support the development of youth programming? And we use ChatGPT. There are many other options out there, but some of the lessons learned that we share with you as you're considering the inclusion of this, and whether or not you're considering it, many of those you work with are probably using it. And so creating guardrails and guidance around it is that there really still does need to be a strong focus on research ethics and protection, the importance of manually cross-checking for accuracy, and sense checking with youth researchers to confirm and check biases, allowing time for experimentation and iteration. So we kind of ask this last question and pose it to you is, have you used it? And are there any other areas where you might explore using it now? And if Emmanuel is in the space to do so, I would like to briefly share some of the local experience from being one of the researchers and implementers. He's still online. I think he might have had, oh, I see. Please come off mic and feel free to do so.
And maybe as people are thinking that, just to get to your point, Mike, about objective versus subjective, I think that it is important to recognize that like the story of Wenjiku like was flattened a little bit from this really like diverse data set. But going back to storytelling, I think you also think about the stories of others, but when as a learner, the story of you, right? And so after every prompt, we had the participants think back to how Wenjiku's story reflects or contrasts with their own story, their own ideas. So like when Jiku does a study schedule and then they're asked to make a study schedule. When Jiku thinks about like what support system she needs to be able to digitally upskill, they have to make do the same thing. And so we were always kind of like grounding everything that this like kind of flattened generic Wenjiku character was doing with prompts for the learner to reflect and like kind of use that to compare and contrast for their own experiences. And at the end, they actually make their own like learner profile that is kind of what is your study schedule, like what is your learning goals, how like are they smart, what is your study schedule to get to there. What is your support system? How will you share your accomplishments? What are some of the risks that you might face in moving online in a more kind of systematic way? So we definitely thought about that throughout the process.
That's great, Brittany. Just a quick response to that, as I've been trying to grasp the magnitude of what you're presenting. There's just so much here. But the story created by generative AI seems to me, if nothing else, a wonderful start. And then whether it's the youth or the researchers or whoever's involved in creating those stories could unflatten them a little bit or maybe make them richer with some subjective perspectives on them. But what a great way to get started in creating a storied approach like this. And even if it's flattened, it is honoring what the students said.
Yeah, Yeah, and we became attached to this fictional character that we created.
Yeah.
And like at the end of it, we were like, oh, she's like got a job. And we're like, we got her the job, like but it was definitely it felt like a real person that you were rooting for. And I think the participants felt the same way. Maxie was there when it was piloted, and Maxie can speak more to that experience.
Yeah, the youth we had in the pilot really felt like they resonated with and were connecting with Wanjiku and, sharing, wow, this is so interesting, and diving into that. So while it was designed as a self-guided curriculum, as you'll see when it's live, it also can be facilitated, and that was done really well in adaptation by the Safe Online Women team.
Right.
I think with that, we can open it up to any broader questions or reflections, and then we share our information there for future conversation.
I have a quick question. I don't want to dominate the conversation too much, but I'm kind of overwhelmed with interest in what you're talking about. Um, can you say something about the learning curve in using this sort of technology? Like, how long does it take to become competent enough to use it even minimally effectively?
Maxie, do you want me to speak to that, or?
I mean, I can say I was very new to using this technology, not at this research process, but we used it in a previous one just less than a year ago. And to be able to turn around and do it again, but also leaning on the fact that Brittany was much more versed on this. And so it's about joining your team together. But I think the 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 goal should not be mastery, because in the same way we're trying to promote lifelong learning, these tools are going to be changing and adapting regularly. So it is to just continue to have conversations, try, iterate. I would say that's the best recommendation when it comes to using any of these tools, is to be curious, to iterate, to try things out, and to not be hard on yourself if it doesn't come right the first time, because it won't. So yeah, that would be my reflection. I see that Emmanuel was able to join us, and so also this was, I think, some of the first time that the youth researchers used ChatGPT as well, or were familiar with it. So Emmanuel, would you like to share a reflection on any of the pieces of this implementation? Please go ahead.
Thanks, Maxie, and sorry I dropped off when you tried to call me to speak at least about one or two aspects in the digital upskilling pilot. Maybe something I would say is that indeed there is an uptake of digital upskilling by youth in Kenya, but something good to mention is that the pilot created some form of intentionality in terms of selection of which digital skill to upskill with, and also like youth were able to know that to learn and get to understand the various aspects of how to select what they would like to do digitally. And probably I would say that as you've just said, people related to Wanjiku, the persona we created. It's good to note that this curriculum would really help in terms of now creating that intentionality, and therefore increasing increasing the chances of them upskilling. Happy to answer any more question in regard to that. Back to you, Maxie.
Search.
Thank you. I think if anyone else has any other questions, I'm also putting in the chat some other examples of research that we conducted with the same team in Kenya, as well as some other teams in Ukraine and Malawi. At IREX, we're very passionate about working together to develop research, hence why we have some external toolkits to help others develop this. but really in youth and workforce development. These are three of those more recent things in my predecessors and since I've joined IREX that we've been able to partner on. Any other questions or reflections we have coming here?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask Emmanuel again, if you wouldn't mind. Um, what could you just recap what your role is in the project, and also maybe just comment generally on the reception of this project in your community, and maybe finally the the maybe the immediate utility of some of the aspects of this project to your community.
Uh, Thanks, thanks, Andrew. I would first speak about my role. My role, I was among the four youth researchers that were able to interview for 44 youth in Kenya. Based on what we did, we selected youth between the age of 18 to 35 years, both male and female. So in that case, we were able to interview them and also get to understand their digital upskilling process, or whether they've been able to have a chance to interact with digital tools online. On the second question, in terms of in terms of now getting to pilot, I was among the Safe Online Women team in terms of piloting the curriculum among uh, female youth in Nairobi, Kenya, and it was and I would say, and I would like to be backed by Maxie that it was indeed a success by intervening, by piloting the tool. And I would say such a curriculum would really go far and wide in now having youth try it out and also get their intentionality and also understanding in terms of digital upskilling. Probably that's what I would say. Happy to answer any further questions, Andrew.
Thanks. Yeah, I look forward to perhaps following up with some additional questions to you offline. Thank you.
And if there's ever any work that needs to be done in Kenya and you want to partner, we have a great team. So any other reflections or questions from anyone?
I just put the overarching learning objectives for the digital youth curriculum in the chat because I realized we did not say those, and this is a community of educators, so forgive me. But yeah, so the curriculum was meant to improve people's ability to upskill, and recognizing that they're probably going to be doing this outside of formal education environments. And that as they do so, they might there might be more risk that they are exposed to via just engaging in digital spaces, especially for women.
I think I want to borrow a phrase that Mike used a minute ago. I don't want to take up too much airtime here, but I do wonder about the broader economic context. I don't know. I've worked in South Africa, but I haven't worked in Kenya, and I'm not aware of the current, let's say, unemployment rate or the sectors that are have high demand, or the gap between the skill set that is out there and the employment demand. And these are just kind of the broad questions that I like to think about in terms of workforce development, or matching skills to opportunities for youth. So any comments on that would be really helpful, but that's just my final thought.
I guess my only reflection on that would be that the youth that I had the opportunity to meet in Kenya and have interacted with are incredibly knowledgeable about what they need in order to adapt to the market. And so I think it's almost a little bit of a shifting of focus into how can we support them in doing what they're already doing. And that's where this comes out of is not independently trying to identify what the unique challenges are to Kenya, but how do we equip them with the skills to continue to develop and learn to meet the needs that are changing so rapidly. And when I was there was actually a large set of youth involvement in political action around some finance bill that led to some violence, which you may have heard about more internationally, as it was on some large scale news. And it just that's what I kind of walk away with my experience there and in this work is we can't do any of this work without youth, and we shouldn't be doing any of this, but they have such rich experiences and skills to give you that input. So how do you develop data collection measures to gather what are the challenges in a particular context and implement them quickly into a development of curriculum? And that's why some of these tools that we've shared today, I believe, can be helpful in doing that and being able to quickly and rapidly respond to changing dynamics in the field. I don't know if that directly responded to your question, Andrew, but like that's my big takeaway is it's not about us spending a lot of our time trying to really independently get a full handle on the needs of any individual context, but instead let's build partnerships with those who do have that on the ground and take that and work it into anything that we're able to do.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. And, I think of my own work in rural parts of South Africa and thinking about labor migration and, the desire of young people in rural or semi-rural areas to go to the city where some of these kinds of opportunities might exist. Just some thoughts. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe if I could add
Please.
what
Please.
Maxie has said,
Yes.
Andrew. Yeah. I think there's quite a high unemployment rate in Kenya, and youth know that given that there is the high unemployment rate, they've immersed themselves in different activities to curb the the high unemployment rate. You find that youth, like Maxi has said, are at the forefront of legal and political change in the country, so that they would be able to get these opportunities both locally and internationally. You also find that since there is very high unemployment rate, you find that youth have also are also trying to upskill digitally. And I would say the pilot and the study was quite spot on, because youth were able to relate to what they were going through, and they were hoping that the tool would enable them to have that intentionality and also to gain even much more skills than what they thought they would. So yes, unemployment rate is very high, and they all know that unemployment rate is high, and they are finding ways in order to curb this unemployment by getting into self-employment and upskilling themselves digitally to either become self-employed or to stand out among other, or to stand out while they are applying for various opportunities through digital upskilling. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's really helpful context.
Andrew, I know we're kind of at the end of our time, right? So I just want to chime in with a big thanks to the group. Really thought-provoking work. I hope we can follow up on this conversation. One of the GPN's missions or focuses is to build networks of support. And so there are lots of implications for the work you're doing and how you expand the network of what you're doing, which I'm sure you're working on and thinking about, but would love to have that conversation at some point down the road as well.
Indeed. So yes, let me just follow up on what Mike has been saying, and just thank you again to Maxie and Brittany. You've been fantastic. I've learned a lot. This is like Mike said, there's a lot here to learn more about. So really appreciate it, and thanks everyone for attending today. Really appreciate everyone coming in and contributing and chatting, and hopefully we can all stay connected. Be sure to check out our GPN YouTube channel for a copy of this video. Thanks, everyone. Have a great one.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.